Maria felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't hide them. These tears didn't hurt, they healed. The wealthy guests stepped back, humbled even more, realizing they had almost crushed someone extraordinary. The manager whispered from behind the counter, "Maria, this is your chance," a worker added. "We'll all support you." Even the little girl from yesterday entered with her mother at that very moment. As if guided by fate, she ran to Maria and hugged her waist. "You play like magic," she said softly. Maria knelt down, hugged the girl back, and suddenly understood something. She wasn't just playing for her mother anymore. She was playing for every person who needed hope. Every heart that needed healing. Every child who believed in kindness. Maria looked up at Mr. Hathaway with shining eyes. Her voice steady but emotional. "I want to try," she said. "I want to see what I can become." Hathaway nodded proudly. "Then your journey begins now." And for the first time in many, many years, Maria didn't feel small. She felt powerful. She felt chosen. She felt ready. The music inside her was no longer trapped. It was preparing to take flight. Maria woke up before sunrise the next day, but for the first time in years. She felt excitement instead of exhaustion. The sky outside her window was still dark, yet her mind was bright, alive. Filled with the memory of Mr. Hathaway's offer, she sat on the edge of her bed, holding a warm cup of tea between her hands. Staring ahead in disbelief, a music academy. "Me?" she whispered softly. It didn't feel real. It felt like a dream her younger self once had, then buried too deep to remember. She took a slow breath and placed her hand over her heart. "Mama, are you seeing this?" She asked quietly. It had been years since she spoke to the memory of her mother so openly. But last night's events had cracked open something inside her, a part she thought had been lost forever. Tears stung her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. From hope, from rebirth. Maria arrived at the cafe early, even before the manager. She wanted time alone with the piano before the noise of the day could distract her. She gently lifted the cover of the piano, touched the keys, and whispered, "Today we start again." The keys were cold, but they responded to her touch like an old friend remembering her warmth. She played a soft melody, simple, shaky, but full of emotion. As the first notes floated through the empty cafe, the door opened quietly. Mr. Hathaway stepped inside. His eyes softened when he saw Maria lost in the music. "Practicing already? I see," he said kindly. Maria stood up quickly, embarrassed, but he shook his head gently. "Don't stop," he said. "When you play, you speak." She sat again, but her hands trembled. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "What if the academy doesn't like me? What if they think I don't belong there?" Hathaway walked closer. "Maria," he said. "Music schools train technique. They teach skill. They polish talent. But what you have cannot be taught." His voice was warm and steady. "You have emotion, heart, depth. That is the real music." Before Maria could respond, the wealthy group from the other day entered the cafe. But this time they walked differently, slower, humbler, respectful. They approached her with nervous smiles. "Maria," the girl said, We heard about the academy." Maria glanced at them, unsure what they wanted. "We wanted to say congratulations," the boy added, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "You deserve it." Maria was surprised. Their voices carried no mockery, only sincerity. It was strange, but healing. People could change. She realized that now. "Thank you," she said quietly. And with that single moment, the tension between them dissolved like mist in sunlight. Later that day, Hathaway guided Maria to the academy for her first informal meeting. The building looked intimidating: tall glass windows, polished floors, students carrying instruments worth more than her monthly salary. Maria felt her knees weaken. I shouldn't be here, she whispered. Maria Hathaway said firmly, walk with your head high. Your gift brought you here. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. A middle-aged man with soft eyes and a professor's calm expression greeted them. Ah, this must be the pianist you told me about, he said to Hathaway. I'm Professor Ellis. Maria shook his hand gently. It's nice to meet you, she whispered. He smiled. Let's hear you play. Those words hit her like thunder. All the courage she found that morning suddenly crumbled. Her heart raced, her hands trembled, her breath caught in her throat. She looked at the grand piano standing in the middle of the room. It was beautiful, shiny, perfect. It scared her. The old cafe piano had felt safe, familiar, forgiving, but this was a stage for real performers. Take your time, Ellis said softly, noticing her fear. Hathaway placed a reassuring hand on her back. Remember, he whispered, play for yourself slowly. Shakily, Maria approached the piano. Her reflection looked back at her in the polished black surface. She looked small. Nervous but determined, she sat down. Placing her hands on the keys, the room was silent. Every sound waiting on her shoulders. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and let everything go: fear, doubt, shame, for a moment. Nothing existed except her heart and the keys beneath her fingers. Then she began to play. At first, the notes were soft, hesitant. But soon her fingers found their rhythm, her memories, her soul. The melody shifted into something deep and powerful, filled with her pain, her healing, and her courage. Professor Ellis lifted his eyebrows. Stunned, Hathaway closed his eyes, moved. The sound filled the room like golden light spilling through dark corners. When she reached the highest emotional point of her piece, her voice inside whispered, Mama. This is for you. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was heavy and sacred. Ellis slowly stood up, his eyes glistening. Maria, he said softly, where have you been all this time? She blinked, confused. What? You belong here, he said. If you want this. The academy doors are open for you, Maria gasped. Her hands flying to her mouth, tears streamed down her cheeks. Hathaway smiled proudly. Ellis added gently, talent like yours is rare, pure, emotional, honest. We would be honored to have you. Maria felt a warmth bloom inside her so strongly that she thought her chest might burst. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't luck. This was her destiny finally waking up. Maria had always lived a simple and quiet life. She worked at a small cafe in town, served tea, wiped tables, and listened to customers talk about their busy lives. She didn't dress in fancy clothes or wear expensive jewelry. She didn't speak loudly or try to get attention. She was the kind of person most people didn't notice when she walked by, but inside her there were deep feelings, old memories, and a talent she had hidden away for many years. One rainy evening, the cafe was busy. A group of wealthy young guests entered. Laughing loudly and acting as if they owned the place, they wore stylish clothes and expensive watches. Their confidence filled the room, and their voices rose above everyone else. Maria greeted them with a polite smile, but they barely looked at her. They treated her like she was invisible. The group sat near the dusty old piano that stood in the corner of the cafe. It was a broken-looking piano that almost nobody touched anymore. Maria often wiped it clean because she felt sorry for it. But she never played it, not in front of people. She only touched its keys once in a long while, when the cafe was empty, when she was alone. And when no one could judge her, one of the wealthy girls noticed Maria watching them quietly from the counter. She whispered something to her friends, and they all started giggling. Then one of the boys pointed at the piano and said loudly, "Hey, why don't we make the waitress play something for us?" Another boy added, "Yeah, it'll be funny. She probably doesn't even know how to read music." The group burst into laughter. Their voices were sharp, mocking and full of pride. Maria heard them. She froze for a moment. Her heart sank a little. She knew they weren't asking because they wanted music. They wanted entertainment or embarrassment. They wanted to laugh at her, to see her struggle, to make themselves feel superior. She felt her cheeks growing warm. She looked down at her hands, trying to avoid their eyes. But the group did not stop. One of the girls waved at her dramatically and said, "Come on, don't be shy. Play something for us. We want to see what a cafe worker can do." Another girl smirked and whispered loudly on purpose, "Oh, she probably press random keys and call it music." More laughter followed, harsh and cruel. Maria's manager came out from the kitchen. But before he could say anything, the group insisted again. They said they were regular customers and wanted to be entertained. The manager didn't want trouble. So he looked at Maria and said softly, "Just play something small. It's fine." His voice was kind, but his eyes showed pressure too. He didn't want to lose customers. Maria felt trapped. She wasn't angry at her manager. She knew he depended on the cafe to survive. But she felt a knot inside her chest, a feeling of being pushed into something she didn't want. She slowly nodded, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy, as if she was walking toward a stage she wasn't prepared for. The wealthy group leaned back in their chairs with wide, entertained smiles. Some even took out their phones, ready to record her. They expected a joke, a failure, something to laugh at later. Maria sat down on the piano bench, the wood cold under her. The keys were dusty and stiff from not being played. She took a deep breath and cleared her throat, trying to control her nerves inside her mind. Old memories flickered her mother sitting beside her when she was a child, guiding her small hands across the piano keys. The warm sound of music filling their tiny home, the way her mother smiled with gentle pride. Those memories were precious. And Maria rarely allowed herself to touch them because they hurt too much. Her mother had been gone for years. Now, as she sat there being mocked, those memories wrapped around her like a protective blanket. Her hands still trembled, but not from fear alone. Something old and lost was rising inside her. The room behind her buzzed with whispering and silent laughter. They didn't believe in her. They didn't see her. They had already decided who she was, simple woman with no talent. Maria placed her fingers on the keys and looked down at them. She could feel dozens of eyes staring at her back. She wasn't sure what would happen next. She wasn't sure she could even play in front of people anymore. But she knew one thing clearly: if she played, it wouldn't be for their amusement. It would be for herself, for her mother, for the part of her heart she had buried long ago. And as she took a final breath, the cafe fell strangely quiet. Everyone waited for a mistake, for a laugh, for something to mock. But Maria's story was just beginning. Maria sat at the piano with her hands resting lightly on the keys. The cafe suddenly felt too quiet, as if the whole room was holding its breath. Even the sound of the rain outside seemed to soften. She could feel the wealthy guests staring at her, waiting for her to fail. Their eyes were sharp, amused, and cruel. They weren't expecting music. They were expecting a joke. But Maria's heart was beating with a strange mixture of fear and something else. Something she had not felt in a long time. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her trembling fingers in her mind. She saw her childhood home again, the small living room, the wooden floor, and her mother's gentle hands guiding her through each note. Back then, music was the only thing that made sense. It was the only place where she felt safe. But after her mother's sudden death, Maria couldn't bear to play anymore. The pain was too deep, the memories too heavy, so she pushed music away, telling herself she would never touch a piano again. But now, forced by strangers who wanted to laugh at her, something inside her cracked open. It wasn't anger, it was a spark. A tiny piece of her old self awakening after years of sleeping. She exhaled slowly, and her fingers moved hesitant. Searching, remembering, she pressed the first key. The note was soft, barely louder than a whisper, but it carried emotion. It carried truth. The group behind her fell silent for a second. Surprised that she didn't immediately mess up, Maria felt a sudden wave of doubt. What if she really had forgotten everything? What if her fingers didn't remember the songs her mother taught her? She pressed another key. Then another, forming a small, uncertain melody. It was fragile. Like a baby bird trying to fly, but even in its fragility, it was beautiful. A waiter who had been wiping a table nearby paused. He had known Maria for years, but had never heard her play. He tilted his head, listening carefully. The wealthy guests exchanged confused looks. They had expected chaos, but instead, they were hearing something delicate and pure, something real. Maria's fingers slowly stopped shaking as the melody took shape. It was a song her mother used to hum while cooking dinner, a soft tune filled with warmth and love. Maria had forgotten it for years. Or maybe she had only hidden it deep in her heart, but now it poured out of her through the keys. The sound filled the room gently. Like the first light of sunrise entering a dark room, one of the rich girls frowned. Trying to understand what was happening. Is she actually good? She whispered to her friend. Her friend shrugged but didn't reply. His eyes were fixed on Maria's hands. Mesmerized, Maria didn't see them. She didn't hear their whispers anymore. She was far away, lost in a memory. She was a little girl again, sitting next to her mother on a sunny afternoon. Her mother's voice echoed softly in her mind. Music is not for showing off, Maria. It is for speaking when words cannot. Those words wrapped around her heart. Gently pushing her forward, her melody grew a little louder, a little smoother. The notes didn't stumble anymore. They began to flow. The cafe air changed. Soft gasps filled the room. A couple walked in from outside and stopped in the doorway. Drawn by the sound, they stood quietly, not wanting to interrupt the moment. The wealthy group shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't expected this. They wanted to make fun of Maria. Not witness her talent. Their smirks faded, replaced by confusion, annoyance. Even a hint of embarrassment. One boy pulled out his phone again. But this time, not Tamaki was recording because he didn't want to miss what was happening. Maria opened her eyes slowly as the melody grew deeper. She realized people were listening, not laughing, not mocking, truly listening. For the first time in years, she felt something powerful rising in her chest. It wasn't fear anymore, it was confidence. It was her mother's music guiding her hands. It was her hidden self coming back to life. She shifted into a different melody, one she had created as a child but never played for anyone. It was hopeful, gentle, and full of emotion. Her fingers moved with growing certainty, each note forming a bridge between her past and present. Between memory and reality, the cafe, once filled with chatter and noise, was now silent except for Maria's music. People leaned forward in their chairs, some with soft smiles, others with teary eyes. Even the rain outside seemed to listen, tapping softly against the windows like applause. Maria didn't understand the full impact of what she was doing yet. She only knew that for the first time in years. She felt alive. She felt seen, not for her simple clothes or quiet nature, but for something deeper, something true. She wasn't performing to impress anyone. She was releasing years of silence, pain, and love through her fingertips. And as she continued to play, something extraordinary was beginning to form around her, a moment that would change everything. A moment that none of the bullies, none of the customers, and certainly not Maria herself would ever forget. Maria played softly, her fingers moving like they were rediscovering a forgotten language. But as the melody grew stronger, something strange happened in the cafe, something no one expected. The crowd didn't just listen, they felt the music. They felt every note reaching deep into their hearts. It was as if Maria's hidden emotions were flowing through the piano and filling the room with a story no one knew she had. A couple near the window leaned closer together. A man who looked tired from work straightened his posture. Even a child clutched her mother's hand and stared in fascination. The music was alive, breathing, touching people one by one. But Maria was lost in her own world, unaware of how powerful her playing was. She didn't see the crowd gathering at the entrance. She didn't see the wealthy guests shifting in discomfort. She didn't see the waiter standing still with wide eyes. All she felt was the warmth of her mother's presence beside her, guiding her hands like once before. Then, suddenly, the melody changed. It deepened, darkened, becoming richer and sharper. Something inside Maria shifted as she played. A memory surfaced, one she had avoided for years, the last day she ever played the piano. She was only 14, and her mother had fallen very ill. Maria played beside her bed, hoping the music would comfort her. But later that night, her mother passed away, leaving behind only silence, grief, and a piano that Maria couldn't bring herself to touch again. But now, years later, that painful memory rose from her chest and flowed into her fingers. Her music became heavier with emotion, sadness, longing, love, all mixed together. The audience felt it instantly. A woman in the crowd covered her mouth as tears ran down her cheeks. A man rubbed his eyes, pretending it was the dust. Even the rich guests who mocked her earlier stared with speechless faces. They no longer saw a simple woman. They saw someone who carried a story inside her bones. The room grew still. Every breath felt slow, gentle, and heavy at the same time. Maria's music was no longer something to listen to. It was something to experience. The cafe manager stepped out from the kitchen and stopped at the doorway. He had worked there for 10 years, but had never heard anyone play the old piano like this. He watched Maria with a deep respect he never showed before. The usual stress on his face softened into something warm and proud. Meanwhile, the wealthy group who forced her to play were slowly realizing what they had done. Their smirks faded into guilt. They had expected a joke, but instead, they were witnessing something rare and beautiful. The girl who started the teasing looked down at her hands, ashamed to meet anyone's eyes. The boy who mocked her the loudest swallowed hard and whispered, "She's amazing." His voice was barely audible. A few others nodded, unsure how to react to the kindness and talent they had tried to crush moments earlier. Maria, however, remained unaware of their emotional shift. She was too deep in the music, too deep in the memory. Her fingers flowed faster now, moving across the keys with confidence she forgot she had. It felt like her mother was sitting right beside her again, correcting her posture, whispering encouragement. The music transformed, no longer dark, but bright, bursting with joy. It was like a sunrise after a storm, a new beginning. The shift was so sudden and beautiful that people gasped. The entire cafe felt lighter. A spark of hope filled the air. Maria's melody rose like a bird, taking flight, lifting everyone's spirits with it. The child near the doorway smiled for the first time since entering the cafe. A worker who had been having a terrible day felt the weight on his chest slowly lifting. Even strangers shared emotional glances, silently acknowledging the moment they were witnessing. Maria opened her eyes slowly, but she didn't stop playing. She saw the room differently now. People were watching not with mocking smiles, but with admiration and softness. Their eyes glistened, their faces calm and gentle. She felt her breath catch in her throat, not from fear, but from surprise. She had not expected anyone to listen like this. She had not expected her heart to touch others so deeply. The wealthy guests met her gaze for a brief moment, but none of them could hold it. They looked away, their pride broken by her talent and their own shame. Maria felt a small tremble in her chest, not from weakness, but from strength for the first time. She felt the weight of years slowly slipping off her shoulders. Music didn't hurt anymore. It healed, it breathed, it lived again inside her. Her final notes echoed beautifully through the cafe, hanging in the air like tiny stars. The room remained silent not because they didn't want to clap, but because they didn't want to break the magic. Everyone was frozen in awe. One more note, one more moment. One more breath, they wanted to keep it forever. Maria lifted her hands from the keys. Her heart was racing, her eyes slightly wet. Her mother's memory settled gently inside her like a warm embrace, and just as she thought it was over, a child's small voice broke the silence with a whisper that melted every heart in the room. "Play more." Maria froze when she heard the child's whisper. It was such a small voice, yet it carried so much innocence and truth that it reached straight into her heart. She turned her head slightly and saw a little girl standing near the doorway, her hands holding a small toy rabbit. The girl's eyes were wide and honest. Filled with wonder, she wasn't mocking. She wasn't judging, she was simply amazed, and that simple request, "Play more," felt like a gentle hand touching Maria's soul. For a moment, Maria didn't know how to respond. Her fingers hovered above the keys again. Unsure, the cafe was silent. Everyone waited. Not because they demanded more, but because they hoped she would continue. Maria's heart beat faster, her chest rising with deep breaths. She had come from fear, from shame, from painful memories, but now something new was rising inside her. A soft glow, a quiet courage. She looked around the room, really looked. The faces she once feared were now softened. Changed, people leaned forward with hopeful eyes, as if they were waiting for a miracle. Even the wealthy guests who had mocked her earlier sat still, their expressions uncomfortable, confused, even guilty. One girl bit her lip, unsure whether she should look at Maria or hide her face. The boy who recorded her earlier now held his phone lower. Embarrassed by how he had treated her, the weight of their actions hung over them like a dark cloud. Maria turned back to the piano. She took a breath. But before she began to play again, something unexpected happened. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and a warm face. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent his life around music. He wasn't a regular customer. Maria had never seen him before. He approached the piano slowly, respectfully. As if approaching a sacred place, the wealthy guests shifted uncomfortably. Recognizing the man, one of them whispered urgently, "That's Mr. Hathaway." The retired conductor, the others stiffened, shocked. The name rang through the cafe like a soft thunder. Everyone knew of him. He was a respected figure in the world of classical music, a man who had shaped the careers of many musicians. His presence changed the atmosphere instantly. Maria felt her breath catch. Why would someone like him step forward? What could he possibly want from her? But Mr. Hathaway didn't speak right away. He simply stood beside the piano, listening to the silence that still wrapped around the room. Then he gave her a gentle nod. "If you'd like," he said softly, "please play one more piece." His voice was calm and encouraging, not commanding. It held the same warmth her mother's voice used to carry. Maria swallowed hard, her throat tightened. She wasn't used to attention, especially from someone important. She felt like a simple woman again, poor clothes, quiet nature, no confidence. But then she looked at the little girl still watching her with hopeful eyes, at the strangers waiting with soft smiles, at the manager standing proudly behind the counter, and at Mr. Hathaway's kind expression. Her fingers lowered to the keys once more. This time, she didn't play a childhood song or a memory. She played something she created in her heart at that very moment, a fresh melody. Born from the pain she had lived through and the strength she was beginning to find, a melody filled with gratitude, courage, and the blooming of hidden hope. The notes began softly, like a fragile flower opening its petals to the sun, then slowly grew into a powerful emotional wave. People in the cafe felt it immediately. The music wrapped around them like warm light. Healing, peaceful, and honest. It wasn't just talent, it was truth. The kind of truth that only comes from a soul that has suffered and survived. The child with the toy rabbit sat on the floor. Mesmerized, her mother knelt beside her, tears in her eyes. A group of teenagers at the back stopped whispering and simply stared. A worker who had been sweeping paused mid-movement. Leaning on his broom as if afraid to miss a single note, even the wealthy guests were drawn in. Their shoulders dropped, the tension leaving them slowly. They looked at Maria with a mix of regret and admiration. One girl covered her mouth, ashamed of the cruelty she had shown earlier. She whispered, "How could we not see her?" But her friends remained silent, their eyes fixed on Maria as if they were looking at her for the very first time. Mr. Hathaway closed his eyes as the music rose. His fingers twitched slightly. The way musicians do when they feel each note inside their bones. When Maria reached the climax of the piece, the entire cafe felt it like a wave of emotion crashing gently through the room. It was the sound of a woman reclaiming a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. When the final note faded, the silence was even deeper than before. No one moved, no one breathed for several seconds. Maria sat frozen, afraid to turn around. Afraid of what she might see, but when she finally looked up, she didn't see mockery or judgment. She saw awe. She saw admiration. She saw hearts touched in a way she never imagined possible. And then something happened that Maria would remember for the rest of her life. Mr. Hathaway stepped forward, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and said quietly, "My dear, you have a gift the world needs to hear." Maria felt Mr. Hathaway's words echo inside her. You have a gift the world needs to hear. No one had ever said anything like that to her. For years, she believed she was ordinary, invisible, forgettable. Now this respected man, someone who had shaped music itself, was looking at her with genuine admiration. It felt unreal, like she was dreaming while awake. But before she could say anything, a soft sound began to rise behind her. Someone was clapping, slowly, gently. Then stronger, louder. Maria turned her head. For the first time in her life, she saw an entire room standing for her. Every person in the cafe, old, young, rich, poor, strangers, workers, even those who mocked her earlier, was applauding. Not because they felt sorry for her, but because they truly felt moved. Tears shone in many eyes, smiles spread across faces, and the little girl with the toy rabbit clapped with all her tiny strength. Maria raised her trembling hands to her chest. Overwhelmed, her heart felt too full. As if it might burst, she blinked rapidly. Unable to stop the emotions rushing through her, she had never been praised in such a way. Never been seen, never been valued like this. She looked at her own hands, those same hands she had once believed were useless after her mother's death. Now they had touched the hearts of strangers. Mr. Hathaway waited for the applause to fade before speaking again. "My dear," he said softly, "how long have you been hiding this talent?" Maria swallowed hard. Her voice felt locked in her throat. I haven't played in many years," she whispered. I thought I wasn't good enough." Hathaway looked at her with gentle disbelief. "Not good enough? You play with a soul many trained musicians only dream of having." His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket. The wealthy guests sat stiffly, guilt etched on their faces. The girl who mocked her earlier stood up quietly and walked toward Maria. She hesitated, her hands shaking. I'm sorry," she said softly. "We shouldn't have treated you like that." Her voice cracked with shame. Maria looked at her, surprised, before she could reply. One of the boys stepped forward too. "We were wrong," he said. "We didn't know. Maria didn't know how to feel anger, forgiveness, confusion. All of it mixed together. She didn't answer them yet. And Hathaway gently placed a hand on her shoulder, as if telling her she didn't have to. Just then, something unexpected happened. The cafe door opened again, letting in a gust of cool air. A few more people entered, confused at first. Then curious when they noticed the crowd gathered around Maria and the piano. The manager whispered excitedly. People outside heard the music. They came in just to see who was playing. Maria gasped slightly. She never expected her music to reach beyond the room, to pull strangers off the street like a magnet of emotion. Mr. Hathaway stepped a little closer and said, "Maria, may I ask you something important?" She nodded nervously. "Would you consider playing at a small charity event next month?" The room fell silent again. Everyone looked at her, waiting. Maria felt her heart stumble. "Me?" she whispered in front of people. Hathaway smiled warmly. "Yes, because your music can heal. It can reach people in a way few musicians understand. I think your gift deserves to be heard for a moment." Maria couldn't breathe. Fear rose in her chest. But so did something else, hope. A spark of bravery. A quiet flame that had been asleep for years. She glanced at the little girl, whose eyes were still glowing with admiration. She glanced at the strangers who looked at her with warmth. And she realized something powerful, something she had never understood until this moment. People didn't want perfection. They wanted truth. And she had truth in her music. Her voice trembled as she answered, I don't know if I'm ready." Hathaway nodded without pushing her. "You don't have to decide now. But know this: what you did tonight is something special." As he spoke, Maria felt something changing inside her. Slowly, quietly, like the first flower blooming in winter. For years, she lived small. Afraid to shine, afraid to be seen. But now, with every breath she took, she felt a little stronger. A little braver, a little more alive. The cafe manager approached her nervously. "Maria," he said, I had no idea you could play like that. If you ever want to perform here on weekends, the stage is yours." His voice cracked slightly, as if he had been holding back tears. Maria wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. She wasn't used to kindness. It felt strange and overwhelming, but beautiful too. She looked at the piano, the old dusty piano she had once avoided. Now it looked different, like a friend who had been waiting for her return. "Maybe," she whispered to herself, "maybe I can play again," and for the first time since she lost her mother. Maria didn't feel broken. She felt whole. She felt hopeful. And she felt like her life was finally beginning. Maria went home that night with her heart still racing. The city lights outside the bus window blurred into streaks of gold and white as she stared quietly, replaying every moment in her mind. The applause, Mr. Hathaway's words, the little girl's whisper. It all felt unreal. She pressed her fingers gently together, still feeling the warmth of the piano keys on her skin. It was as if her hands had woken from a long, heavy sleep when she reached her small apartment. She placed her bag on the table and sat down in silence. She had lived alone for years, and the quiet usually comforted her. But tonight it felt different, less lonely, more hopeful. Like the room itself was waiting for her to breathe. Maria took a deep, shaky breath. "What am I becoming?" she whispered to herself. She felt like a door inside her had opened. And behind it was a part of her she thought had died with her mother. The next morning, the cafe was buzzing with talk. Workers whispered excitedly. Customers looked around as if hoping Maria would appear at the piano again. The old piano that once felt invisible now stood proudly in the corner. Like a legend people wanted to see come alive. The manager greeted her with a smile warmer than she had ever seen from him. "Maria, you were amazing last night," he said. "People are still talking about you." She felt her cheeks grow warm. Still not used to praise, but not everyone was ready to face her. The wealthy guests from the night before walked in together. Their voices were low, their steps hesitant. They spotted Maria and froze, awkward and uncomfortable. The girl who mocked her earlier held her purse with both hands. Twisting the strap nervously, the boy beside her cleared his throat. His usual arrogance gone, Maria stood by the counter, unsure whether to pretend she didn't see them or to face them. But before she could decide, the girl stepped forward. "Maria," she said quietly, "we want to talk." The cafe fell silent as everyone watched. Maria's heart tightened, but she nodded for them to continue. "We're really sorry," the girl whispered. "We didn't know. We didn't know who you were, what you could do." Her voice trembled. And it wasn't fake. The boy stepped up beside her and said, "We acted like fools. We shouldn't have treated you like that." Maria looked at them, searching their faces, not for excuses, but for sincerity. And she saw it. She saw real regret, real shame, real understanding. She didn't know what to say at first. For years, she had endured little humiliations, small cruelties, quiet disrespect. Part of her wanted to stay hurt, to punish them with silence. But another part, something softer, felt no anger left inside her. She finally said, "Thank you for apologizing." Her voice was gentle. And for the first time since she met them, the wealthy group looked relieved. The girl's eyes even glistened with tears she tried to hide. Just then, the cafe door opened, and Mr. Hathaway entered. His calm presence shifted the whole room. People straightened, whispers faded. He smiled when he saw Maria. "Good morning, my dear," he greeted. Maria felt a warm wave spread through her chest. "Good morning," she replied nervously. Mr. Hathaway continued, "I came to ask you something important." The wealthy group stepped aside, respectfully. Giving him space, "Maria," he said kindly, "I have a friend who teaches at a prestigious music academy." Maria blinked, confused. "Yes." Hathaway smiled softly. "He wants to meet you. I told him about your gift. He believes you might earn a place there." The entire cafe gasped. The manager nearly dropped the tray he was holding. Maria felt her vision blur, not from dizziness, but from emotion. Place in a music academy. She whispered, "But I have no training. I've never been a student." "I don't have money." Mr. Hathaway raised a gentle hand. "Talent like yours does not belong in the shadows," he said. "If you're willing, I will sponsor you myself." Maria covered her mouth with her trembling hands. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Why? Why would you do that for me?" she asked, voice breaking. The old conductor smiled. "Because the world needs music with heart, and yours carries more heart than anything I've heard in years." Maria walked out of the academy building with her heart beating faster than it ever had in her life. The sky above her seemed brighter, the air seemed lighter. Even the sounds of the street felt different. She kept touching her chest, as if checking whether her heart was really still inside. I got in," she whispered to herself again and again. Her voice trembled with disbelief, joy, and gratitude all mixed together. Mr. Hathaway walked beside her, smiling proudly like a father watching his daughter take her first steps. "You earned it, Maria," he said gently, "not because of luck, but because of courage." Maria swallowed hard and nodded. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered. Hathaway shook his head softly. "You believed in yourself first. You just didn't know it." Those words hit her deeper than she expected. When Maria returned to the cafe later that evening, the entire place erupted in excitement. The manager rushed forward with a grin. "Maria, is it true?" he asked breathlessly. "Are you really joining the academy?" Workers came out from behind the counter. Customers leaned forward in their seats. Even strangers she had never spoken to before clapped with joy. Maria felt her eyes fill with tears again. "Yes," she said quietly. They accepted me. The room exploded with cheers. The wealthy group that once mocked her also stood nearby. They didn't cheer loudly, but their smiles were soft, honest, completely free from arrogance now. The girl from the group stepped forward. "Congratulations," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. "We're really, truly happy for you," Maria smiled gently back. "Thank you," she said. And in that moment, something painful finally healed inside her. Forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was strength. And she felt stronger than she ever had. But the most unexpected moment came when the little girl with the toy rabbit entered the cafe again. She ran straight to Maria with a bright smile. "Did they like your music?" she asked. Maria knelt to her level and nodded. "They loved it," she whispered. The little girl's eyes sparkled with pride. "I knew it," she said softly, hugging Maria tightly. That small hug felt like a blessing, as if the universe itself had reached out to embrace her. That night, as the cafe quieted down, Maria sat alone at the old piano again. Her fingers touched the keys gently, but she didn't play immediately. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly. Feeling the memory of her mother's presence settle like warm sunlight across her shoulders, she whispered, "Mama, I made it. I didn't stop. I didn't hide. I didn't give up." And for the first time, the memory didn't hurt. It felt like her mother was smiling. Then she began to play, not because anyone asked, not because someone forced her, but because music finally felt like home again. Her melody rose softly, peacefully, filling the cafe like a warm blanket. People walking by outside slowed their steps. Listening through the windows, a couple entered and sat quietly, letting the gentle music wash over them. Her coworkers leaned against the counter, closing their eyes as they listened. The wealthy group sat in the corner, watching her with admiration, realizing they had witnessed the rise of someone extraordinary. Even the manager, who rarely stopped moving, stood completely still, letting the music sink into his heart. And Maria kept playing, moving from one melody to another, letting her emotions flow honestly, freely, beautifully. Every note she played felt like a promise to her mother, a promise to herself, a promise to the future she had once believed was impossible. When she finally stopped, the room was silent, yet again not a silence of surprise, but of reverence. Everyone knew they had witnessed a transformation, a rebirth, a miracle made of sound and courage. Mr. Hathaway stepped forward one last time. "Maria," he said softly, "your journey is just beginning." She looked up at him with shining eyes, her voice steady. "I'm ready," she whispered. He nodded proudly. "Then go and change the world." Maria stood, touched the old piano one last time, and smiled deeply. The same piano that once held her pain now held her victory. She walked to the door with her head high, her heart strong and her soul alive. People watched her go, knowing they would remember her story forever. The simple woman they once overlooked was no longer invisible. She was a rising star, a musician with a gift that could heal hearts, a woman who turned mockery into music, fear into courage, pain into power. And as she stepped into the night, Maria knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning.